Welcome back to Meet Bridget. Keshiia here. I'm the COO and co-host of the Meet Bridget podcast, and together with my best friend and partner, Asha Gabriel, I help run a confidence and communication platform for teen girls called Bridget. We're back today for another one-on-one episode of the season. As we all know, motherhood has become such a large part of both of our lives. We've got Mother's Day coming up. To date, Mother's Day will be on Saturday, but this episode will actually drop just after. But why not honor our experiences and the mothers we love in our lives? So today Asha has two beautiful baby girls, Eden and Nina, and I have a son, Jude, all of whom have transformed our worlds and have enriched our lived experiences as women.
As a little disclaimer, we will likely be candidly discussing, as we always do, issues including pregnancy, pregnancy loss, and body image. And should any of these issues or things be triggering to you at this time, please feel free to sit out this episode or see our show notes for resources. And additionally, as always, our conversations are sourced from and biased by our own personal experiences. Nothing we say here is prescriptive or conclusive. We always hope that, our conversations and our honesty here can just support that community that we care so much about. So welcome to our Meet Bridget community, new listeners, and welcome back, longtime listeners. We hope you enjoy our conversation today, all about motherhood. So, hi, Keshiia.
Hi,
Hi,
Ash.
Mama.
Okay, so this is a big, wide, vast conversation topic. I feel like we, as friends have gone into every sector of motherhood, from like the down and dirty to the beautiful and transcendent. So I think maybe where we should get started is by talking about our own moms.
Yeah, I think especially in honor of Mother's Day, it's funny, even having become a mother, when I think of Mother's Day, I always think of my own mom and my mom's mom. It's like it's almost like I celebrate them first. It still feels weird that like we are moms and it's kind of like we're part of that holiday now.
Is
Yeah.
that something I still like can't believe I'm a mom. Like
Is that
I was actually just having this thought earlier today where I was like, I'm a mom?
I still kind of feel like I'm
What?
like playing that. Like it's kind of like a funny joke
Yeah.
that I'm getting away with.
So,
But
disclaimer, imposter syndrome exists in all roles.
yes, I know. Love it. Yeah, but I know I thought it'd be fun for us to kind of like reflect on, I think your experience of having a mother and how you kind of relate to your mother, it transforms throughout your lives. I mean, throughout your life. So here we go. Honestly, this is real
Yeah.
motherhood though, because it's like a hell of a day, a long day. Right now, we're getting around to recording after having to delay basically
No less
twice
than.
and rescheduling after 2 days because of all the demands of family and work
Yeah.
and motherhood. So it's very real.
Teething kids, mini tantrums.
Yeah,
Yeah. All
all
the
the things.
things.
But yeah,
Oh,
we thought
man.
we would talk a little bit about, our moms and how we relate to our own moms. And I think that we realize as we get older, I almost feel like it aligned with like almost every decade so far, where it's like, oh, right around the
Hmm.
decade mark, like things shift a little bit, where it's like when we are children, like pure children, like our own, your mom is just like, you don't question anything. I don't remember comparing my mom to any other mom for a very long time, and even if it was just sort of like there was no consequence to it. It was just sort of like my mom is my mom. And I think that I am very lucky to have had that like experience of that like security, but
Yeah.
it was until definitely grade school before I even like noticed that other people had mothers and that they maybe did things a little bit differently than mine.
Yeah. I feel the same way. I think, well, firstly, I mean, everyone starts out this life with a mom, but I think we have to acknowledge here that not everybody gets the experience of growing up with their mother. So, I mean, as a kid growing up, that's not even something that would have ever crossed my mind, as an adult now, having been through all of the different experiences we've individually gone through. I mean, you realize that everybody has a different circumstance. And I think we're both very fortunate with the moms that we ended up with And not to say that they are flawless or without their own struggles or their own adventures, if you will, but just the fact that they are two moms that are here and that have shown up have, that's built a foundation, I think, for both of us. I think I was really lucky in that I had my mom, and my mom has like five sisters. And so it's like you get the mom and all the bonus mommy figures. My mom is, I guess I'm first generation American. I think that's still correct. My mom emigrated from the Philippines with
Yeah.
her family when she was between 8 and 9 years old. And so I think that experience of growing up with a mom who wasn't born in the United States is quite different.
Yeah.
Um,
We
there's,
share that experience too. And
yeah,
you
yeah,
know what's funny? I feel like entering motherhood, I literally feel sometimes like I have entered a new country and like I feel so out of my depths. And it's just like everything is so new and you're just kind of inventing things as you go, which is fun and
yeah.
creative. But it's also like, whoa, where am I and how do I do this? But then I think about like our mothers and having, my mom immigrated here when she was 21, young and like right before all of her, she was in school and doing things and then to start a family and motherhood and everything in a new country. I can only imagine,
What that
how
was like.
yeah, how that must have felt. So a lot of the time when I feel like a little when I feel lost or like I'm doing everything new or for the first time, sometimes I like to remind myself that like literally my mom moved here and she didn't even know the language. Like she didn't
Hmm.
even really know English and she moved here and figured it out. So like I can figure this out.
Can we learn a little bit about Johnny really quick? Like,
Yeah.
so I didn't even realize that she didn't move to the United States. I think maybe I did know she was in her early 20s, but did she
Hmm.
move here by herself for
Yeah.
school or did she move with family?
Yes, so my mom is one of four. She's the youngest. Her oldest brother moved here on his own, and his plan was like to like set the foundation for everybody to
Mm.
eventually come over. So my mom was I think, the second one to actually come over at that time. Still, some of like the stories and stuff are a little murky sometimes, but she came over for college, and then like everyone kind of trickled over from there. So they have all these like wonderful stories of like their first years in America and just trying to figure things out and living together and, my mom going to college and like all this stuff. It was just, it's so amazing, like the sacrifices that were made and just the boldness and bravery to come here and like establish a whole new life. It was amazing. Like my mom's from India. We didn't make it back to India until our adult years, just a few years ago for the first time. And I always ask my mom, like, why haven't we gone to India, when I was a kid? And she's like, oh, it's just kind of a hard place to like, go with kids. And like I realized that when we went back, I was like, wow, India, I mean, to me, it was difficult to go as an adult in some ways
Hmm.
because they always say like India is like an assault on the senses. It really is. Like there's so much to take in there, and the extreme poverty next to extreme wealth and so many people in one place, but it's also such a beautiful, rich culture. So, anyways, I had this amazing experience of going back with my mom to the street where she grew up. And that was like a real full circle moment for me and for my mom, like she stood on like the plot of land. It was redeveloped into like a different type of building. But she was like, this was where my house was. And she's like, it's so weird that it looks so different now. But like the temple that she like used to go to was still there. And this like milk stand that her mom and sister used to work at, where it was like on the street. And my mom would tell me about these like stories of her childhood, like playing with like a stick and ball in the street. And like, I think that she came from like very humble beginnings there. And to see
Hmm.
like the life she built here as an eye doctor and the life that she has like enabled for my siblings and I was through a lot of, you know, just spunk. Honestly, my
Yeah.
mom has spunk and passion. And I just like the more I grow as a mother, the more I really like realize how much she put into what she built for us.
Yeah. That makes total sense to me because knowing your mom, I mean, she's very reserved when you first meet her, but she's got such a joy for life and for fun and laughter. And you can really see, like, just knowing you and your sister and also Mikey, but like, especially you and Arch, like, how much of that you get from your mom, that zest.
Yeah, and she really is like a hard worker, but she showed me this
Hmm.
example of like how to work hard, but also with passion and empathy for people. Like
Hmm.
she in her career as an eye doctor, like she really cared. She cared about everything that she did and really invested in her business and the people that she worked with. And she only just recently retired, so it's just been really. I'm so proud of her. As her daughter now too. And it's cool because like I think one of the things we wanted to talk about is sort of this like evolution of your relationship with your
Hmm.
mom. And you go from being like, it's when you're a little kid, it's like what your parents say is sort of like the law, yeah, and you don't really have much to compare it to. And then you start comparing it with other moms. And then, like, I mean, I definitely had a little period of like just friction with my mom when I was like
Hmm.
hitting puberty and stuff. And who knows what it was even about. Like, it wasn't a kid that got in like a lot of trouble or anything, but my mom and we butted heads for a little while for
Yeah.
sure. And I look back and I'm like, how silly. Like, what did I have to like, fight with
Yeah, I
my
think
mom
there's
about?
that period of, I mean, for sure there's that time as a teenager where I distinctly remember just trying to figure things out. And I guess there's this sense of like, I gotta figure this out, on your own.
Hmm.
It's like this stubbornness. And even though, in retrospect, my mom was right about virtually everything,
Yep.
the idea of relinquishing that, relinquishing what I thought was like the right thing to my mom at the time just seemed like so unheard of. It's wild. It's wild, like stepping into the role of motherhood now and just having that little bit of imposter syndrome because you think our kids are so young. But there is going to come a time where we're going to be like, let me teach you what I know about the world.
Yeah.
And my kid is going to turn around and be like, you have no idea what you're talking about. And it's going to break my heart a little.
Totally. Well, it's funny because I also think that when you're like growing up as a teenager, you hit a point where you're like, you're aware of like this separation of yourself from your parents. I think you
Hmm.
hit an age and you're like, oh, my life is my own, and then you start like taking pride in that. And you're like, my choices are my own choices and everything. Even though that's like the case kind of from the beginning, like you hit a point where you realize that. But I think that becoming a mom has made me so, so aware of the fact that like there's another side to that process. Like,
Hmm.
even, I mean, Keisha and I have been talking about breastfeeding. We're both, on this like breastfeeding journey. And I felt like the transition from being pregnant to having your baby out in the world, that was like a big transition to me. 'Cause I'm like, oh, I had this baby that was within me and I could control it and we were together all the time and now she's out in the world. And like that's one separation. And then like you're caring for your baby and they can't walk or do anything. So then like that's one level. And then you stop eventually, you're gonna stop nursing or whatever and they're sleeping in their own bed. And each one of those things, I don't know, to me, I really had to be like, okay, like my baby does not belong to me. I am just like if my baby's an arrow, I'm just like a bow. And I'm going to eventually have to let it go and like, have it go in a direction. It's like I
Hmm.
can just do my best to like prepare her or whatever. I don't know if that's a good analogy, but like as a mother, you also have to like come to this place where you realize like your children don't belong to you. Like you're there to take care of them and guide them, and shepherd them in a way. But I felt like that was a big learning.
Yeah, like the Khalil Gibran
I think that's where that
poem.
analogy is
Yeah.
coming from, huh? Maybe we can link
Yeah,
that
our
one.
children, I'll link it. It's actually, my dad used to read it every Passover. We still do. I don't know why I said used to, but it would like make us all cry because I'd be like, oh,
Yeah.
your children are not your children.
Well, and at first, I think the first time I read that, I was a little bit like, but like I worked so hard at this. Like pregnancy was so hard and I did all the right things and like, I care so much and like what? Like this is not like mine to be proud of. And like that it's funny when you realize that you can be even more proud of something that doesn't belong to you than you could ever be
Yeah.
proud of anything that you could ever own. You
It's like the
know?
spiritual level has been unlocked. Like
Yes.
Jude will do things and I'm so impressed by it. And I don't really try to compare him to other kids. for me, I like just want to make sure he hits like his developmental milestones, that if he's not, like, okay, then we like talk to the doctor and like we
Yeah,
figure
to
out like
make
different
sure there's not something else
things. But
going on.
like, yeah, exactly. But he's doing things now that are actually quite advanced. And I'm kind of surprised by it because I'm like, well, I feel like what we've been doing is we've just been listening to what he wants and what he needs. Like, people will be like, how's your baby? Like, he's so good. And he is, but he does cry a lot. Like, you could probably hear him crying in the background right now. But he just, like, you allow them to, like, explore and do things. And there's just, like, this innate wisdom. And so a lot of times I'm like, I didn't really do any of that. Like, I feel like he gets it. And I'm just, bearing witness and trying to guide him in the best way I can. And I think about like the way that my mom did things, and she was always very, she had that pragmatism that I think a lot of immigrants have. It's like, okay, there needs to be a logic and there needs to be a plan, and there's like a bit of anxiety about how things are going to go because you really, if you think about it, you give up your whole life to move to a country where you don't speak the language. You don't, I mean, the United States doesn't have really its own custom. It's truly this
Yeah, melting
melting
pot.
pot. And, the American dream is something that I think still exists. And so when you're coming from a different place and setting up shop in a new home, you have a lot more, it's taken a lot more to lose. And I think, so my mom raised us with that type of mentality, but she also wasn't afraid to let us be creative. It was like, have a plan and be smart, but like, okay, if you want to dance, dance. If you want to sing, sing really loud.
Hmm.
Like, here's markers, here's crayons. I mean, I did get in trouble for destroying an expensive piece of furniture with like artwork.
Quote unquote.
Quote unquote artwork. They were like love letters to Leonardo DiCaprio and Ryan Gosling.
Real emotion.
Yeah. I remember hiding under my bed. My dad's like scrubbing it. He's like, "What is this? Why would you do this?" And I was like, "I don't know. I'm in love." That's totally a besides the point thing.
Well, it's also
But
funny.
yeah.
It's like in moments of, you'll probably experience this more when your little man is a toddler, but like in moments of just like pure like confusion, like toddlers will just do things to just like, they're just testing, they're learning.
Yeah. Yeah.
They don't know logic. Like you can't apply
Yeah.
logic to a toddler. But it's so funny. I learned so much as a mom because it's like, it's also difficult for me to be like, okay, take a step back. Where is their brain development? Like, was she
Yeah.
doing this to experiment? I'm like, maybe the fact that she's like hitting her sister right now is because she like has pent up energy or she's hungry or this or that. I have to like kind of not be like, why on earth would you do that right now? Like she literally like, grabbed my hair the other day, started yanking, and I was telling her to stop. I'm like, stop, Eden, stop. It hurts me. I turned around and I looked at him and I was like, why would you do that to me? And then I was like, okay, Asha, like
She
she is
doesn't even know.
she
She's
doesn't even know.
experimenting.
Like she's tired and she's trying to see what the reaction is. And,
Yeah.
I think we learn
Testing
again.
boundaries.
Yeah, it gets us to like back up a little bit and like, okay, how can I expect my child to emotionally regulate, and
Yeah.
apply logic and listen if I'm not emotionally regulating, in my reaction to her, if I'm not like taking a deep breath and being like, oh, wow, like what you just did was a little frustrating to me and I need to take a breather over here and then I'm going to come back,
Yeah.
or whatever, like demonstrating examples for her. So I can constantly like
Like meet
learning.
you at a level that you can understand.
Yes. Yes.
Oh
So it's
man.
interesting too, because I feel like discipline and stuff has changed so much in a good way. Like
Mhm.
each generation does what they are taught,
Taught. Yeah.
what the resources they have, you know, tell them. But I feel like similarly to you with that immigrant mentality, like my parents were very much like that you have
Mhm.
to pick a path, and like grades in school are non-negotiable, like there is no reason why you can't be the best at this, and we will help you
Mhm.
to the point that you will be, like if you need extra focus to work on your schoolwork, like we'll help you with that. Like if you whatever it is, like my parents made sure that we prioritize like academics and stuff,
Mhm.
but then, also supported. They're like, oh, you want to go do this dance class? Or you want to go do this thing? My friends are just like, like go do the stuff. So I liked that combination of, yes, I think that immigrant parents get that, like, what do they call it? Like tiger mom you know,
Mhm.
kind of bad rap sometimes where it's like, oh, your parents were like so strict and everything. I'm like, yeah, strict, but like I think when you understand their experience coming here and everything, it kind of like there's context for it.
Yeah. I also really appreciate, and I don't think like there were plenty of things about my childhood growing up that were, I would say, dysfunctional. But I mean, when I think about, so for our listeners that listen to our individual interviews back in season one, like my mom's second husband adopted me when I was 5 years old. And so for a little while in my life, it was just my mom and I. I mean, I had my grandparents and cousins and aunts and everything. But my mom was a single mom for a little bit. And I distinctly remember her being my North Star and, you know, seeking comfort in her. And, she's my mom. But when I think about it in retrospect as an adult, I think it's really, you have to give such credit to moms, all moms, but I really think there's like a special award that should go to mothers who are doing it on their own. And like we work and we have kids and it's challenging and
Yeah.
we have great stable partners. So, I mean, my mom was really incredible. She worked full time. She figured it out. Like I never, like looking back, I don't ever feel like I was abandoned or not, my mom wasn't around or anything like that. So whatever she did, she like set up a good base layer as
Okay.
a single mom, regardless of the challenges. And there's balance. There's balance. And I really like appreciate a lot of the things that she did, she had me in dance classes. She made sure that I went to play dates. Like I was in school. I was reading at a really young age, which I don't know how my mom pulled that off. Like I know I was an early reader and like you have to work to teach your kids these things.
Yeah. Well,
So it's just
it's
wild.
interesting. I feel like that kind of stuff too, though. Like we were talking about earlier, you're like, yes, it's like you nurture a child
Mm-hmm.
brain and like I think it is such a great approach that you're talking about where you're just like, let's just see where he's kind of guiding us and then like help him there. I think that that's such a healthy way of parenting because that I feel like with kids, it truly is. It's like they are so their own little people and they just I think that I had that was a learning for me. At first I was like, there's so much information out there for us now. Like when I talk to my mom and my mother-in-law, they're like, oh my gosh, you guys have so much gear and so many resources and so many things as moms that we didn't have, which is such a blessing in so many ways, like these portable
Mm-hmm.
pumps and stuff, like literally
Oh my
life
God.
changing, but I think with the just plethora of informative sources on the internet and just things that, people telling you how the best way is to do something and all the research you could access, it can also be super, super overwhelming where it's
Oh
like,
my gosh, the
oh,
unsolicited advice.
yeah. And it's like, am I not doing anything right? And what happens if I do it wrong and my kid hits a milestone and I didn't do this and I didn't do this? And if I don't do all these things, then my kid isn't going to have this stuff. And I remember, with Eden, I was so worried about, she was kind of just like a more quiet kid for a long time. And I
Mm-hmm.
was like, oh, do we need to take her to like a speech pathologist? Is her hearing messed up? Is it this? How, like, I was so, so concerned. And then in her own time, she just like literally when it was really around the time when like Nina got here, she just had this like language explosion and like English and Spanish and she's talking and now like she's so insightful and that you would never guess that there was any kind of delay and it's just like for me it was such a lesson in like let go and let your
Mm-hmm.
child blossom because she is her own thing and I think that going along with like that teenage time that we were talking about, where it's like you start to assert your independence and you're like, I am separate from you guys and it's my life. And like, I'm gonna do what I want to whatever extent that you can.
Mm-hmm.
But I think from that point until like honestly, for me, it was like until I became a mom, I really thought that like if I'm going to be proud of things, it's gonna be because like I made them. It's gonna be my
Mm-hmm.
accomplishments and my choices and my life and now it's like this awakening really where it's like wow the things that I'm most proud of are things that like honestly in the end I have very little control over. you know?
Yeah. I feel like I've absorbed a lot. My sister jokes about this all the time, but she'll be like, "Oh my God, you sound just like mom. You're turning into mom."
Yes.
And like a lot of the time I'm like, "Ugh, what do you mean? Like I'm still young and cool, right?" And then I
Yeah.
like think about it and I'm like, "Well, so is my mom." And she's a great example of, somebody that has always had a sense of adventure and creativity, and she just has a really, like, my mom is a Taurus to the T. She just gets shit done. Like, there's nothing stopping her when she has something in her mind. And, I have to hand it to her because I think that I'm pretty tenacious. And then I think about my mom and like the lengths that she's gone through in her life, like moving countries several times, like going to school in Japan. I mean, the whole thing. I'm like, I don't, it's brave. It's, she's been very, very brave.
Yeah.
And so I appreciate now the things that I have, the qualities that I have that are similar to her. When my husband or my sister says something like that, I'm like, yeah, I hope so.
Yeah. And you take it like as a such like the best
She also
compliment.
snorts when she laughs,
That's
which is
amazing. That's so endearing.
that little snort that I
Yeah.
had. That's also genetic.
I love it. Well, it also reminds you like what a deep impact that you can have on your own children. That it's like the
Hmm.
ways that I realize that I am like my mom are really things that she never sat down and taught me. It was just the way that she was, and I'll catch myself doing things with my kids. Like I was what was I doing? Oh, I was washing Eden's face. She had avocado all over her face. And I like so much so that I had to like take her to the sink and like hold her over the sink and just
Hmm.
like take
Hmm.
water with my hand and like kind of like not
Yeah.
waterboard her, but like kind of wash
Yeah.
her face with my hand gently. And I had this like visceral like sense memory of my mom doing that with me. And like just the feel of her hand in the water, just like cleaning my face and how good it felt. And it's funny because I've noticed like both my babies love when I wash their faces. Okay. They
Yes.
so prefer it to being like wiped with a napkin or
Yeah.
something. And they just both smile and they just love it, even though their faces are covered in water. And I was like, oh my gosh, like my mom, I remember the feel of my mom's hands doing this kind of thing
Oh
to
my
me.
God. I do the same thing with Jude. I give him sink baths, and
Yeah.
since he was an infant, he used to hate getting wiped down with a washcloth.
Yeah.
And I thought he just didn't want to be cleaned. And then I started just doing it by hand. So I like hold him in the sink and like wash his little body with my hands. And I still do it to this day. He's, going on 8 months this week, but he loves it and he loves the water. And I think my mom used to do the same thing. And my mom's mom
Mhm.
used to do the same thing for all of us as kids. In the Philippines, they have this thing called the tabo, which is anyone who's like ever listened to Joe Coy will like know what I'm talking about now. But basically, like every OG Filipino household will have like a cup or saucer or something. It's usually like a cup from like 7-Eleven or
Mhm.
like or like an old butter container. And like we just use those with like warm water and like you tub the your like private parts like after you use the bathroom. It's like a thing that all Filipino households do. And as a kid, I remember like my grandma would be downstairs cooking, and I like viscerally remember being like 2, 3 years old using the potty and being like, Nana, I'm done. Like screaming downstairs, and she'd drop everything she was doing and come upstairs and take the tub out with warm water. And like, I just sit there and she'd like
Yeah.
pour warm
Yeah.
water down my back into the toilet. And I
Yeah.
like, and like now it's a cleanliness thing. You just, I don't know. I like do the same thing for my kid, and
Yeah.
probably will do it for all my kids. And
Well, and it's funny those little like I think for me there's a lot of it is touch, and like the
yeah.
way
Mhm.
like I even no one really taught me how to like hold my babies, or to how to comfort them and what to do to calm them, and you just kind of like evolve this ability to like you just know like what to do to
Mhm.
kind of like calm your baby, and you develop different things, and it's weirdly it's like now it's different things for each baby that I realize like, oh, she
Yeah.
likes this thing and she likes this thing. But some of those things that, yeah, they've passed off even from like my grandmother. I'm like, I remember my grandmother, like when we were sick, like she'd put like Vicks on our chest.
Yeah.
And I did that with Eden when she had this cold. And it's just like, I love those like little generational things that
Just
get
the
passed down.
feeling, just
Yeah.
thinking about your mom or your grandma rubbing that on your chest, it's like the most uh, core memory
Yeah, that
unlocked.
like and nothing can I still remember like the feeling even when my grandma was like the oldest. Like I remember the feel
Hmm.
of her hands, as my grandma and like the way that they looked. And I always thought they were just like so beautiful, and
Hmm.
wise, just like looking at her hands and holding her hand. And I just think it's such a cool thing to just see the effect of your own hands on your children.
Hmm.
That
Yeah.
was kind
I
of a tangent, but like I think it was an example of like how the impact that we can leave on our children.
yeah.
It's not always like, oh well, I sat down and I did crafts with them, and then I did this and I did that, and then I made their lunch into like little bunny rabbits, and like like those are all really great things, but like I think that the ways that the lasting ways that our parents can impact us are beyond words sometimes.
It'll be really interesting to see what our kids pick up from us because, there are plenty of things that I want to impart on my son, but I have a feeling he's going to create his own catalog of favorite memories or things that,
Totally.
mean something to him. It's kind
Totally.
of wild. It's like one of those things where I feel like there's a lot of pressure on you, but like also it is what it is. Like he's gonna choose
Yeah, well,
whatever
I
he
almost
wants.
find like when I feel like I'm the best mom I can be, it's in moments when I'm able to like let go of any of like the
Mhm.
consequences. Because I think you can get down the rabbit hole of like, oh my God, like what if like he heard me, or she heard me like get upset in that moment or this or that. And like, what is, oh no, I like accidentally, like, I yelled at her because she threw this thing on the ground or she hit this or whatever it is. And I yelled. I like, I finally snapped and I yelled. And like, maybe that will be her, like, her core, memory of me being afraid of me. Like, and then you can just get like so hyper aware of what you're doing as a parent. And it makes you
Yeah.
very, it actually makes me worse. Like, it makes me more
Yeah.
likely to snap because I'm just like so, you know, focused on myself. But I think that when I feel like I'm being the best parent, it's just when I'm just present with my kids. I'm like, what are you
Mhm.
showing me right now? Like where are we going? And let's just be together. So it's kind of letting go of some of that control. Really, I think that we've talked about this too. I think from the moment you get pregnant too, especially, both of us have had journeys with, like we were talking about in our last episode, our co-episode on body image. I
Mhm.
think that in our journeys with our bodies, like our bodies are really sometimes can feel like the one thing that we really have some level of control over. It's like I can do these things that make me feel good or that don't make me feel good, but to some extent I have some control over my
Mhm.
own faculties. I mean, again, like aging and stuff that can sometimes change. But with pregnancy, I think both of us discussed that like you get pregnant and then that sense of like control really goes out the window. I
Oh yeah.
mean, not all women, I guess, have that feeling. Some people are just like, yeah, and then pregnancy happened and it was like the best version of me and I loved it. And I love those women and I envy them. But I think that for a lot of women, it's like, oh man, like this overwhelming tiredness or nausea
Mhm.
or this or that. And it's like, it's to an extent, it's like you can't control it. You can't.
Oh
It's
yeah.
just like that little baby is
You're just along for the ride in a lot of ways. I feel like pre-pregnancy into pregnancy, I mean, the whole thing, your body is just hijacked. And even like the good times, I feel there's an element of an out of body experience to it where I mean, you can't help how it's going to go. I mean, firstly, like I am an anxious person at base, like I overthink and have like a plan A, B, C, and D, And I've learned, throughout time and with practice how to relinquish some of that and how to be not necessarily go with the flow, but to learn how to let things roll off of me and to have peace with different outcomes. But with pregnancy, it was really a challenge because especially with the first pregnancy or the first pregnancy that goes well, you have no basis of like good or bad or right or wrong. You're experiencing it for the first time. It's literally an otherworldly state. Like it's hard to describe, and thinking about being pregnant with Jude like less than a year ago is so it's bizarre in a good way, in that it's like, wow, I did that. My body did that.
Yeah.
I and whether or not you trust it to do it or not, like you take care of yourself the best that you can. Like I exercised, I ate good foods, like I listened to my doctor, I did my own research. But still there's like, you know, you can't control anything. Like I learned with my first and second and third pregnancies, like you can't really control how everything's going to go, and it might, it should end up great. Sometimes it doesn't, and that can be very, very scary, like relinquishing that.
Yeah, I'd love if you feel comfortable. I know you and I have talked about wanting to share some of your experience with getting pregnant and pregnancy loss. But I'd love to kind of like walk through that with you if you feel comfortable.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for asking. I don't think that people get to talk about this enough, and people don't get to hear it enough. But for some of our longtime listeners, my husband and I got pregnant back in 2021, like at the start of the year, and it wasn't planned, but we had just always, I mean, my husband and I have been together for long enough that we thought, if we were to get pregnant, if things were to happen, it would be okay. We'd be happy with that. And then it happens, and it's such a shock, and you're not expecting it. And for me, for a long time in my adult life, I wasn't so sure that I wanted or needed to be a mom. I am a really loving and nurturing person naturally, and I really go all in for my family. But I think because I have such a full family life, and I'm the oldest of four kids, by a long shot, I didn't really get the sense at that time that I like ever was like hungering to be a mom right away. But when I got pregnant, for me, my whole perspective really shifted, and I thought, wow, this could be like the start of something. This could be like the next level for me, where I get to unlock everything I have experienced or will experience and impart it on somebody that will live longer than me and will, continue this legacy of living, in whatever way that looks. And so, unfortunately, we made it almost the second trimester, and we found out that our pregnancy wasn't viable, and I had to deliver a baby that was no longer a baby. And it was a very difficult experience, and it was something that I had to come to a spiritual reckoning with. I don't know, in the argument of like when life begins, like I'm not going to interject my stance on that, but the experience of losing a pregnancy, especially the first one, where you're so, for me, when it happened, I felt so naive. I was like, God, how could I have been so happy? And then you lose this pregnancy that you are fully under the assumption the entire time you're pregnant that it's going to go exactly how a pregnancy should go. You are pregnant for 9 months, or nine months and some change, and you go into labor, and then you have your baby, and you get to bring a living baby home. And the only part of that that I was already sort of jaded by was that we lost my niece at full term just the year before, which was heinous, and it still is. But from that experience, you learn that that type of loss exists. And then losing my own pregnancy, you lose like the hopes and dreams that you start to develop during that time. Because it really is sort of like you open this doorway of being able to have an imagination about what life is going to look like with another person in your world and in your ether. And it was a really beautiful, perfect time for me. And I, as devastating as it was losing that pregnancy, that those, initial months were really beautiful. And so, and then, I had subsequent miscarriages. And during that time, I was also undergoing a workup. I was eventually diagnosed with something called ankylosing spondylitis, which is a disease in the autoimmune arthritis family. And so it was like this really weird time for me in life where like I've always been active, you always have these assumptions of how life is going to go and that your body's strong and you can do hard things and all of that. And then I felt like my body had failed me for no reason. I was like, I did everything right. I exercise, I eat well, I'm a good person, I think, or I try to be. But with all those things, you can still lose a baby. You can still have your body develop this like thing that, you're genetically predisposed to. We worked really hard. My husband and I, we did everything right. We did all like the pregnancy planning, the peeing on ovulation sticks, the timing, the, having sex like when you're supposed to have sex, which is basically like, it's crazy. Like you're basically doing it for 2 weeks, then you're like, then for the next 2 weeks you're trying to figure out if what you did worked, and then when you find out that it doesn't, then you're like back on the right. So it's like this constant roller coaster of like trying. We got really lucky in that a year to the day of me finding out I was pregnant the first time, I found out I was pregnant no, not the second time, it was the fourth time. So there was that element of like, is this it? Is this going to happen? But you get really excited no matter what, because it's just like a potential opportunity. And I was sick with COVID, and the difference with like trying the pregnancy test this time, which was a little different from the previous couple of times, was that when I, did my pregnancy test, it was like really, it's like, girl, you're
It's
pregnant.
dark.
And so then I did like 13 more, and it was like, no, no, seriously, you really are pregnant. And then cut to now, my son is 8 months this week, and it was really hard. I talked to a couple friends that are currently pregnant that have experienced pregnancy loss, and when you lose your first pregnancy and you have subsequent miscarriages, for anyone, it's incredibly devastating. But I think there's also this element when it's your first baby of just not really knowing where due north is. It's kind of like, I was telling somebody the other day, it's kind of like you're walking through a forest and you're just kind of like hoping you're going the right way, and everyone's like, yeah, that's what it's supposed to look like, that's the path, but you like have no concept of what it looks like each step of the way until you like get there, until you get to your destination. It was wild. I remember even at the moment of like the doctor putting my baby on my chest, me looking at him and being like, this is real. Like, I
Yeah.
get to take him home. He's real. Just wild.
Well, I mean, as always, I always thank you for like sharing. I know it's like I can only imagine because I haven't experienced miscarriage, but I can only imagine and have so much compassion for that experience because it's I mean, I think it's such a unique and incomparable sense of loss, especially with your first pregnancy, to have that excitement and I honestly I wonder sometimes if it is a product of media and kind of like what the stories we've been told about pregnancy and motherhood, where it's like we don't have any education about, and I don't know, I'm not an educator, but I've always kind of wondered, I'm like, miscarriage is a thing that happens to a lot of women, and I almost wonder, I'm like, I don't think anything can make it easier, that maybe a sense of like just some knowledge around it and lack of stigma and clarification about like, no, this isn't something that you did wrong,
Mm-hmm.
like just some freedom with knowledge about miscarriage among women. I always wonder if like that could lighten the load a little bit, for
Yeah.
women that have to
Yeah.
go through miscarriage and pregnancy loss or infant loss, which happens
Mm-hmm.
too. I'm curious, I mean, in your experience of miscarriage, what would you say was the most helpful reaction or response from people, and what was maybe not as productive?
So this is actually a fairly easy question to answer. I think with miscarriage, it falls into that category of grieving, and people who just in general are unfamiliar or uncomfortable around loss or grief have a really hard time knowing the right things to say, which is very fair. And losing a baby, losing a pregnancy, if you can't relate to it, sometimes it's, I get that it could be difficult to try to understand the right things to say. The wrong things to say are like, oh, this was meant to be, this is how it should have happened, you know, God always has a plan. Things like that, things to try to like put a band-aid over justifying why it was okay that it happened. Those are never the right reactions. I also would hear sometimes, like, because I had multiple miscarriages, like after the second one, somebody was like, well, maybe you just wait next time until you're like 4 or 5 months pregnant, and then like you tell people, because then if you lose it again, then you don't have to like tell people. And I remember saying at that point, I was like, I don't think I'm going to take that advice, because if I don't share with my family what I'm going through, and when I say family, I also mean close friends, like if I don't share with my support system what I'm going through and how much this means to me, then when and if tragedy does happen, I'm going to feel so much more alone. Being able to talk openly to the people around me that I loved and trusted, that was very, very meaningful. The friends and family that had the ability to just give you space, quiet space, just listen and like hold you or stand with you in your grief, that does so much more than many, many words,
Yeah.
than a lot of different words that people could say. And I will say, I'm the type of person where if somebody reaches out, even if it's in a way that I feel is like slightly off putting or offensive, I tend to think of what the intention behind it is. And so, in the case of the person that was like, oh, maybe don't tell anyone, I did say, like, I verbalized exactly what I just said to you. Like, no, I need to be able to speak to my community. But I personally didn't ever, I wasn't offended
Right.
by it, just because I at least felt like, okay, I understand you're trying to be supportive in the way that you know how. But definitely, like, just acknowledging the loss, like my niece, Juniper, we talk about her every day. Like, she's a part of our lives, because that's the reality of it. Like, when you lose a child or when you lose a pregnancy, like, erasing it or not talking about it doesn't mean it didn't happen. But when you're able to speak about it and be open about these experiences, or like the loved ones you lost, it like gives it a way to carry the torch forward and to not minimize the loss, and to honor, the experience and the love you have for that life.
Yeah, I think sometimes with like these levels of loss and grieving, I think it's similar when you lose any loved one. It makes people uncomfortable. And I think like the more tragic the loss, which like the loss of a child is in the unique category of tragedy. It's an unfathomable loss. I think that people get so uncomfortable that they feel this urge to like fix it or
Mm-hmm.
like it's from an intent of like wanting to help. So either they come in and like it's like, oh, but like, and they go through the toolbox and it like each thing is not working. And the more you do that, it's like the worse it gets, where it's just
Yeah.
like, yeah, no, this sucks. I can only imagine how much you're hurting. You must miss that hope, that child, your dreams of that child. You must miss them all the
Yeah.
time. And that really sucks and that really hurts. And I'm here with you. And it hurts me to think of you hurting that way, you know?
That is like way more meaningful than 90% of the things that people accidentally say.
Yeah.
And for sure, it's better than trying to prescribe meaning to it via, like, and I know
Yeah.
it comes from a place of meaning well, but like, when somebody says it was God's plan, then it like really makes the person feel like, okay, well then am I a bad person?
Yeah. Like,
Did
why
I
did God have
deserve
this
this?
plan for
Did
me?
I
I
yeah, did
had to
I do
learn
something
this.
wrong?
Yeah.
Right, right. And that's really not anyone's place to say, and it doesn't feel nice, and it's just, yeah, don't do that,
Yeah.
listeners.
Just don't. Well, I'm glad that we're also having this conversation because I think that sometimes when you haven't experienced something tragic and you're trying to approach how to do it, you can get so in your head of like, well, I don't want to say the wrong thing to the extent that you
Mhm.
don't say anything at all. And I think
Mhm.
that's why there is a lot of isolation and stigma, about some of these really tough things to experience. There is stigma around it, but I think that some of that stigma is perpetuated by people having fear of not knowing what to do around it. And I
Yeah.
think instead, if we can have platforms like this where we can like, okay, let's talk about the reality of this. Let's talk about the community of people that are experiencing this. It is an isolated experience. It's something that's very internal, especially like pregnancy loss, is literally in your own body, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But here are the things that when you have a loved one that's going through this, or if you've gone through this yourself, like here are the things that you can, the helpful things to say or how to be, or just to be in community with someone going through something. So then we have those tools. It's like, okay, you don't have to, out of fear of saying the wrong thing, that doesn't mean you need to just like leave them alone, which sometimes that might be what someone wants. Like,
Mm-hmm.
thank you for your concern. I just would like to process this alone, which is also totally, someone's
Yeah.
prerogative. But I think that it's also kind of tied to, you get pregnant, and I had a great doctor my second pregnancy, very pragmatic, but he kind of, matter of fact, he was like, oh, 1 in 3 pregnancies, is miscarried. Real matter of fact. And then what that was a little jarring to me, I'm like, that might be
Mm-hmm.
reassuring in the sense that it's like, wow, this is a very common thing. Like, can you imagine how many women have gone through it? 1 in 3, any woman that has 3 kids, you could wonder, like, because people think of like miscarriage and they think of like infertility. They don't think of how
Mm-hmm.
many people like, might have kids, but then also went through several miscarriages or had a miscarriage between
Mm-hmm.
kids, or, that it's a thing that a lot of women experience, in
Mm-hmm.
all different ways. But anyway, so he said that. And he was like, yeah, so like, don't tell anyone until, maybe like 12 weeks or whatever. He's
Yeah.
like, just don't get too excited. And I'm like, bless you, because I know the intent was there. But then I think at
Right.
the same time, I had to think about like, okay, well, would it be better for me to not get excited and not share my excitement about this life, inside me,
Mm-hmm.
if it ends not as planned? Does it make it better if I didn't share the excitement about it? And part of me
Yeah.
also is like, whether that life lasted, 1 week inside me or the entire pregnancy, it was still a life. And like,
Mm-hmm.
my excitement, however long it lasts, I think is something I owe to that life, and I think life at any stage is something worth being excited about. I've always thought this, like, oh, keep it secret until this point, just does such a,
It's so
it's well
detrimental,
intended.
I think.
Yeah, but I
Yeah.
think it does such a disservice to motherhood, on the topic
Yeah.
of motherhood here. I'm like, it's part of the whole experience that it's like, yes, there are a lot of miracles that have to happen for a life to enter this world, to make it
Yeah.
all the way through this process, and for the mother to survive that whole process too. A lot of miracles have to happen. But each one, every step of the way, it is a miracle, and we can celebrate it and be in community about it rather than just being like, oh, like don't like get your hopes up until this point.
Yeah. I think that's the first part of the problem, with the stigmatization is that, and I'm going to get on a micro soapbox here, but like, we just don't have a robust education built around, life sciences, like let's just call it that, or women's reproduction or reproduction in general, the amount of steps that it takes, it's not just like the conjugal act, like there are microscopic steps that go into this entire process. And it's literally like shooting a bullseye in order for it to happen,
Mhm.
but like a bullseye through like a Super Mario underworld land where like it has to go through like the hoops of fire and everything and up the fallopian tubes and the whole thing, and the timing has to be right. And it really is like having a baby really is a miracle. And you don't really realize that until you're struggling with infertility or struggling with getting pregnant or, holding on to healthy pregnancies, because you recognize at that time that it's like, you have this 28 to 30 day cycle and you have to do things at this point and then you wait a few days and this is when like the egg should be implanting. It's a wild process that I think if more people were robustly educated on it, like then there wouldn't be as much shame around feeling like your body's failing you if it doesn't happen right away, or if it doesn't happen the first time, the second time, or the first couple of years. I think that's like step one. It really is, it's a gauntlet that you kind of have to go through.
And I think some of that comes from our education around, sex as it relates to
Yeah.
pregnancy. I think that the intention of, scaring us away from like unprotected sex, is around like, oh, you can get pregnant, which is true. Like you can get pregnant on the first time, and this is true. It
Mm-hmm.
happens to people. But I feel like we are taught that like, oh, like you can like sneeze and get pregnant, like you will get pregnant. Like
Yeah.
it just happens. Like whenever you have an
Maybe,
unprotected sex.
maybe at 15 when
Yeah, I
you're
mean maybe. But and then I distinctly remember that feeling of like, people are like, oh, are you guys gonna start trying? And I was like, I was like, okay, like try, and then you start thinking like, okay, then we'll like this month, like we'll start trying, and then we'll get pregnant, and and then you learn there's a whole like science to it, and like, oh, like I honestly didn't even know about ovulation until I was trying to get pregnant.
Yeah.
Like I'd heard the word, but I didn't really know what ovulation meant until I was literally trying to get pregnant.
But it's kind of wild. Like you don't really track like your
Yeah,
own patterns. It's kind of
no,
like for a lot of people, you're kind of like, oh, I know generally when I get my period, and but like there was never a time where I was like, right about now I'm ovulating.
yeah, like I
Like
can tell. Oh, sorry, I shouldn't do that right now because I'm ovulating. And like, I
yeah,
honestly think that I mean, there's some cool technologies and stuff out there, and like, or even just guidance where it's like there's things that you can kind of track to understand where you are in your menstrual cycle. And I think that like we are hitting, on a hopeful note. I do think that we are in a time when it's becoming a little bit more embraced to like understand women's cycles. I think for so long it's just been this like dark hidden cloud where like I distinctly remember as a teenager like buying tampons in CVS was like the most embarrassing thing ever. Like literally no eye contact with the checkout person and like throw in some nail polish and like other like some other things that will like hide it and that it was so shameful. I'm like, why?
yeah.
Like, oh, our teenagers
Fifty
should not.
percent of the population goes through this.
And menstruation is is a building block to the arrival, potential
Yeah,
for children and procreation. I'm like, it's if anything, should be like celebrated. Like, I mean, I don't think that
it's
we're
a
not being
symbol of
crazy here.
health.
It's a
Yeah,
symbol
no.
of health and femininity, and it's just it's a part of life that
Yes.
is undeniable. So I just think
Bleeding your
that like
own blood.
totally, it's okay. And I just kind of, I hope for my own daughters, I'm like, I don't want them to be like the weirdos or anything, but I'm just like, we get close to puberty, it's like, yes, it's going to be uncomfortable to talk about because then you start talking about puberty and then you start talking about sex. And like any parent is going to be a little bit like,
Yeah.
okay, like now they're going to know how they got here and all this stuff. So it's uncomfortable. But I also, I'm like, my hope is that like, I don't want my daughters to ever have shame around their periods.
Right,
There's no room
right.
for shame around puberty and all of this stuff because it's
Mm-hmm.
just like, what is to be shameful about this? Like, I think that there's just been this cloud around women, like puberty and all these other things, and even just like women's sexuality, period. Like, there's just been this cloud of like shame and, you know, keeping things, in the bedroom, like,
Yeah,
just tied up and mysterious. They keep it mysterious. And it's just like, come on already. Like,
yeah.
there's a way to keep our children safe and healthy and discourage unwanted pregnancy. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I think instead of saying, like, oh, don't have sex unprotected because you could get pregnant, it's like, no, like, maybe we talk a little bit more about, like, maybe don't have sex with someone who you don't feel like could potentially be a father of your child. If you don't feel that level of like
Mm-hmm.
intimacy and safety with someone, maybe you probably shouldn't be sharing your body with them. Or like, or okay, if you do have a baby, this is what's involved with it. This is what
Mm-hmm.
pregnancy is really like, and like this is kind of like what it looks like for a woman. And this is really like
Yeah.
educating about conception and pregnancy and parenthood and all these things earlier on rather than just being like sex equals baby equals bad,
Yeah.
and it's just like, it's so confusing for young people.
We got to treat it the same way that society's historically treated it for men. I mean, when I think about how I'd like to raise my son, one thing that's really impressed, I know this is about motherhood, but as a mother, one thing I really find impressive that I didn't know my dad did this until a couple months ago, really. But my mom was telling me that when my brothers were of age, my dad had this talk with them, and it wasn't like they were splitting hairs, like dad talks to the boys about sex and mom
Yeah.
talks to the girls. But he was having a candid conversation with my brothers, and he told them that, if a girl is not interested in having sex with you, if she says no, if she doesn't seem like she's into it, if she's pushing you away, like, you don't need to ask a second time. You have your answer. You don't need to convince her. You don't need to ask again. And I was like, way to go, dad, because it never even crossed my mind that, like, he would have had that conversation with my brothers. But now, as a mom, raising a young man in a world where, as a woman, I felt like I was in a lot of compromised situations, and it took a lot to find the person I felt safe with, or maybe I don't want to make it sound like it was like a gauntlet out there. I mean, I don't want to, like, no, I'm not, by no means am I saying all men are scary or anything like that. So I want to just make that really clear. But, like, when you do find the right partner, you recognize the qualities that you want to see in that partner. And for me, a big part of that was, like, how is he around family? How is he around kids? Like, if one day I want to have children, could I see him being the father of my kids? Not that like you said, not that every sexual encounter needs to equal baby. Like,
Yeah.
girls should be free to, have their own sense of sexuality and not be ashamed of their periods, and not have to talk about it ever.
Hmm.
Like, it should just be a free part of the experience of being human. But as a mom to a little boy now, I'm, like, really excited for that point in time where he'll probably look at me and be like, Mom, why are we talking about this? This is disgusting. But to be like, no, like, you don't have to ask twice. Like, this is what it means to be safe. This is what it means to be a good person, to, like, enter into a consensual relationship, to, like, you know, be an upstanding citizen. So it's exciting being able to be a part of a change in the one singular small way I can be, you
Totally.
know?
And even like, I think when we're like, it's uncomfortable, yes. But then I feel like, I'm like, oh, what would my reaction to that be? I would almost want to be like, it's not disgusting, actually. Like, there is a
Mm-hmm.
really beautiful place for it in our lives, and it can be a really safe, wonderful, loving thing, and it can lead to wonderful miracles like you arriving in the world. And it's just like,
Mm-hmm.
I think that it'll be, as we were talking about earlier, and like, as a mom, like, you just, you see your kid learning and developing at so many stages, that I feel like that it just doesn't end. And honestly, I feel like it is amplified, as once you
Mm-hmm.
have your own kids. Like, oh my gosh, I feel like I'm just like way back in a different kind of school, just like trying to keep up
Oh,
with the
yeah.
course load because it's coming at me hot.
It's so wild. When you say the thing too about, like, your kids constantly watching you, I was talking to my therapist several months ago, and I remember being in a space where I was, like, really nervous about what I was doing, and I was also trying to be, like, very available for, my parents and my siblings, because historically I've always been there for everyone.
Hmm.
And I think I was getting to a point where I was starting to feel a little stretched thin. And I remember her talking to me, and she was like, this is the part where generational trauma and habits come into play, because your son, as little as he is always looking at you. And I don't know, like, if you remember any point in your childhood where you're looking at an adult, but the adult's attention is somewhere else. And she was like, so you have to think about that. Like, think about, like, picking and choosing your battles, because at the end of the day, now your immediate family is your son, and your son is looking to you and absorbing everything. And, all children feel loved out of the womb until they feel abandoned. And I was like,
Yeah.
wow, this is a really intense session. But
Like we're going there.
it really stuck with me because I was like,
Yeah.
geez, he is watching. Like, he is absorbing everything. And if I am putting my attention so deeply into other things, like because I'm trying to fix them because I think that's my role, that I'm not completing my role as his mom and as
Yeah.
his North Star as my mom did when I was little.